My name is Tim Bandos. I am the CISO for Digital Guardian, a data loss prevention company. And today we're going to talk about hunting and gathering, developing effective threat hunting techniques. Here's a couple of things that we're going to discuss. We're going to go over what threat hunting is. We're going to talk a little bit about the skills that are ultimately required to be an effective threat hunter. Talk about attack model selection. I know there's a lot out there in the market, like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the lock keychain. We're going to go into some details around those. We're also going to talk about prepping the hunt. How do you go about preparing for actually engaging in an effective threat hunting campaign? We're going to talk about some hunting use cases, things that you guys can use out in the field to identify adversary, type techniques and tactics and artifacts that have been left behind. And then for the more advanced out there, we're going to talk about some advanced threat hunting scenarios, techniques that can be used for really drilling down and finding the unknown. And then I'm going to wrap it all up in a nice little pretty bow. All right. What is threat hunting? I know there's a ton of definitions out there on the web, but from my perspective, it's human driven, right? It's hypothesis driven. It's coming up with questions, thinking about where do I want to search across my network, coming up with those types of questions where you want to drill down into specific types of behaviors, right? What sort of lateral movement type tools or utilities are executing in my environment? What sort of users are executing these types of programs? What sort of programs are executing out of a temporary directory? These are just a couple of questions that can be asked, in the beginning of prepping for a hunt. It's proactively searching too, right? It's not sitting back and just waiting for the incident to come to you. It's being proactive and going out there and searching across all the data sources that you guys have available to you, right? It's looking at endpoint data. It's looking at network device data. It's looking at all the centralized logs that you have coming in. Any source of data can be really an information pool, a data pool that can be seeked out looking for adversarial type activity, right? And that's what this is about. It's seeking out the unknown. It's not necessarily looking for things that we know about or high fidelity, indicators or alerts that are triggering in our SIM. It's identifying those things that we're unaware of, right? And it also leverage intelligence, right, on tactics and techniques, procedures that are being used by advanced nation state sponsored type threat actor groups. All right. From a skills perspective, what does it all require? So anyone can be really a threat hunter, right? I mean, analysts can go out there, they can look for things within the logs. But if you wanted to be an effective threat hunter, I do believe it comes with having kind of a complete package. From a skills perspective, really in the security knowledge space, understanding, security architecture, asset security, application security, risk management, all of these fundamental pillars of cybersecurity actually help in forming a more well-rounded threat hunter. And then when you really start looking at the hands-on experience, from an incident response perspective, having log analysis skills, malware analysis, forensics, which I think is one of the most important, and then also being able to even conduct threat intelligence when you're, researching a particular adversarial group or looking for, different type techniques that are out on the internet about certain things, right? All of that matters, right? When you're building up a profile of what you're actively going to start looking for when you do conduct a threat hunt. And then the mindset, that's almost just as important as the other two too. Being analytical, being patient and creative and relentless and not giving up and stopping. If you really want to be, I think, an uber threat hunter like my boy Mando over here, you really need to have that relentless nature about yourself and not necessarily give up, because it can be difficult, right? You're looking for things that are unknown in the environment, and you might not be effective every single day in finding something, but there's going to be those days when you do find stuff, and we're going to get into that. All right, choosing a model. There's a ton of models out there, but this is important, right? This is a very important step, because understanding the entire attack life cycle, right, from infiltration to backdoor installation, to command and control, all the way down to exfiltration, understanding each one of those vectors, right, in the attack life cycle is critical, right? Because all of those areas, you can identify traces of adversarial type behavior. Lockheed Martin has a great one, FireEye has a great one, but I think the staple, right, in this industry, and I think by now, right, we all almost all probably agree, is that MITRE ATT&CK framework is absolutely the best, right? It breaks down every single vector, and they've got a fantastic website that really goes into the details of every single area, right? From initial access to privilege escalation, and they drill down into those, right? Application shimming, exploitation for privilege escalation. Every single one of these can be basically a threat hunting campaign, searching out across your environment for artifacts associated with each of these areas, right? If you wanted to look at, bits jobs running or scheduled at jobs executing, or, looking at scheduled transfers across your environment, every one of those areas you can identify, certain types of, like I said, adversarial type behavior. So understanding and picking an attack, model is critical. This is just my recommendation. I do believe the attack MITRE framework is the best. Here's just a little bit talking about what I just went over, right? On the website itself too, right? As we break these things down, they give you a nice definition. They talk about the operating systems affected. They go into real world examples. How do you go about mitigating it? And then most importantly for you threat hunters, how do you go about detecting it, right? How do you actually find, some of these, specific segments or areas right across your environment? And then they even give it a ton of different references as well. So hands down, check it out if you haven't already. It's a fantastic resource for this. All right. Recommended prerequisites for threat hunting. I mean, I know this is just my opinion. Some of you network packet guys might disagree, but I do believe endpoint visibility is absolutely critical, right? Continuously collecting, program execution, network connections, registry activity, file activity, right? As you're collecting all this data, it just becomes, right, a dating mining capability, right? It allows you to then drill down and pivot off of all this information that's being collected across your enterprise. And, if that stim check hasn't come in yet and you're on a budget, you can hit that Sysmon tool because it's free. Sysmon is absolutely fantastic as well. I highly recommend it. If you haven't, had a chance to download that tool and really see all of its capabilities, it is fantastic. It can really solve this use case in terms of, gaining that endpoint visibility. So where do we begin? I do believe once you've gotten that endpoint visibility, you got to start setting the traps, right? Identifying attack activity traits, developing these informational signatures, these lower fidelity type signatures that allow you to pivot off this data and really start identifying some interesting behavior in your environment, right? So getting these rules deployed in your SIM, and then start baselining, understand your environment. Every environment's also very different, but once you start to identify and baseline what's normal behavior environment, you can start to, alert and trigger on things too that maybe are anomalous, right, for your environment. And this is important too. Hunting is not high fidelity indicators, right? So if you enter an IOC that is a high fidelity IOC, if this thing triggers, you got to immediately respond. This is something where you get your level 1 guys on immediately, right? But hunting, right, from my perspective, is something a little bit lower fidelity, right? It's seeking out unknown things that you aren't aware of in your environment. And it does require some baseline, and it does require some pivoting. So I just want to make sure that we delineate between the two, because I do believe high fidelity IOC, hunting in terms of, something triggering an alarm in your SIM that requires immediate action. That's not hunting, right? That's kind of sitting back waiting for the alerts to trigger off. So we're going to go into what are those lower fidelity, type indicators or TTPs that you're going to be looking for. Okay. So from a Sysmon perspective, what do we do? How do we configure this thing? Here's just an example, right? Sysmon version 13.01 is out there. It does have the ability to trigger on rules. Trigger on rules is also very important in this whole threat hunting game, I think. So Sysmon can collect all this great telemetry off the endpoint, like what processes ran, where did it run from, right? But if you want to start understanding context or enriching, that particular data, it's important to also then create these signatures. So here's just an example, right? We have a rule here, account discovery. This is something that's out on the MITRE attack framework. So you can enter the rule name, account discovery, and then you enter a condition. In this particular case, I just have a quick example. I know there's a lot more to account discovery than just this, but if in the command line contains WMIC user account get all, that means somebody is trying to identify the list of accounts, right, on that particular machine. Right? This could be an interesting indicator for your environment. How often does that occur, for your enterprise? If it's something that happens less frequently, then maybe it's something you need to quickly investigate, or maybe it occurs all the time and you want to start looking and baselining the times of the days when this type of things are occurring, or the parent application that is executing these commands. All these different elements can add up to, I think, an interesting threat hunting campaign. All right. here's the hunting signature one. There's just a couple examples I'm going to go through. Account discovery is an awesome one, right? We talked a little bit about that. I showed you a quick example, but this is some additional, things that you want to look for. So if the process equals like command.exe, PowerShell.exe, command key, right, and the command equals any of those other things that you see below there, like net user, even that sneaky little command like doing a dir on the C users, we're watching you, bad guys. We're watching you. I think this is a fantastic rule. It's something that's not always going to yield, fruitful in terms of identifying maybe a nation state threat actor in your environment, but it can. There's always going to be that one time when it actually does. And I think this is important, and I think it's critical, right, to collect, this type of enrichment. Number 2, account creation. How often are accounts being created in your environment? So if you see items like net.exe, PowerShell.exe, DSZ, executing these types of commands like net user add, new user, local user group, right? All these create an account on the endpoint. And from an adversarial perspective, this is persistence, right? This allows the adversary to add an account to the machine, allows them to have possibly administrative rights or privileges to that device so that they can come back and leverage that new account that's been created. I see this countless times, right, during incident response investigations. So I do think this is also very important to add, right, to your arsenal in terms of creating threat hunting signatures. Hunting sig number 3. All right, Windows admin shares. I think this is very important. Adversaries may leverage network shares, right, to move laterally across the environment. They also may be using it to push or transfer files, executables, their tools and information, right, across the environment. I had a particular investigation a couple of years ago. It was a managed services environment that was also providing services, right, to this other company, and this managed services environment got hit. Right, they were attacked. They were infiltrated by a nation-state adversary. They leveraged that trusted connection, right, between the MSP and that customer, and they were moving laterally into that environment. But they were transferring files and binaries and executables, right, over these Windows admin shares, right. So kind of monitoring this type of activity can be very critical, because we see this time and time again too, right. During incidents, we see adversaries moving across the environment and pushing their tools and malware as well. And this could be a fantastic indicator to pick up on, or also just to be used to hunt, right, across your environment to see if you have, an incident, ongoing within your enterprise. Hunting sig number 4. All right, adversaries may clear up, after themselves. We see this all the time too, right? Windows event logs, being cleared with a WEVT util, using that CL command to actually clear the event logs. I mean, I don't know. You could argue with me on this one. This is probably a fairly high fidelity type indicator. I mean, if you're seeing this in your environment, this is probably something you want to immediately respond to, but maybe not. Maybe this is something that you have in like a PowerShell script and it's clearing something for some reason. Don't do this, by the way. But I have seen some IT admins actually do this. But it's important, right, to identify this behavior and then also to respond accordingly. This is another fantastic rule. Looking for this. This is a command regex, so make sure that you accommodate for that, because you're looking for a CL of something else, right? So when they run this WEVT util, they're going to clear something like an application log, a security event log, maybe the remote desktop log. We see that happen a lot as well. Another good signature to leverage. Okay, executable launch from an extracted archive. There's a couple of these examples here. So let's say you're an end user at the computer, you receive an email from, some sort of suspicious email account, and there's an attachment, there's an archive, right? A compressed file. Your end user downloads that particular file, opens it up and executes what's ever inside. This is like one of the most common threat actor entrances that I've seen, right, over the last 15 years. It's phishing, right? This type of activity, though, looking for and hunting through this type of behavior can be very fruitful in terms of, what you identify. So if you see parent processes like Explorer or WinZip or WinRAR or 7-Zip executing a program out of those particular directories that I have there in the file path regex, that's an indication that somebody, clicked on an attachment, they downloaded it to their desktop, and they opened up what's inside of it. Unfortunately, we only can do so much, right, with our end users. We can provide them, a ton of security awareness. We can tell them not to click on suspicious links and attachments, but at the end of the day, they still seem to do it, right? So I just think it's, important to also be prepared and hunt for this type of behavior. All right, that's my job impression. All right, this is where we want to go. 250 plus alerts, maybe more, right? That allows you to pivot off this data and to start hunting across your enterprise, right? There's a couple of examples you see on the left here, right? Looking for automated collection commands, executing commands that collect credentials and files, right? Getting to this, this type of profile set though will allow you to build, right, that information, that data mining event that allows you to pivot off that data. Once you start triggering on all these different, types of events in your environment, you can start every single day picking off a rule by rule, identifying, what happened after this rule triggered, how many endpoints, did this occur on, is there anything suspicious about those commands that executed from that particular rule that triggered. This is, I think, your ultimate goal, right, is to get to a set where, you have a nice set of enrichment information that allows you to pivot through that data. All right. It's hunting time. Let's pick a rule, any rule. As I said, once you get to this state where you can start, picking rules to drill into, this is where you start beginning to hunt, right? In this particular case, I chose modification of the auto run key, right? The auto run key is a location on the endpoint that allows persistence to occur. It allows the malware to necessarily stay through reboots. All right. When malware installs itself, it loves to adjust some of those auto run keys. This could be a great point to look for that type of behavior, right, in your environment. In this particular case, we can see that an auto run key was adjusted, and it looks like it's going to execute this real network.exe out of this extremely suspicious, 9UR7V4 path, right? That's not normal. That's not going to happen. So this particular one stands out pretty well, right? But these are the types of indicators that you're going to want to start looking for, right? These are the types of persistence artifacts that will ultimately lead to, I think, a much larger investigation. Understanding where this also might occur across your entire enterprise. How many machines is exhibiting this type of behavior, right? It's also very critical to scope out these indicators that you're identifying, because if it's on one machine, it's more than likely that it could be on 2 machines, 10 machines, possibly 20. I've had investigations or cases where it's been upward of 100 devices, including servers, right, where we see the same types of artifacts being dropped, and if you don't scope out your intrusion properly, you're leaving potentially malware, rootkits, backdoors behind, and if there's a backdoor network connection out to some command and control infrastructure that you're not aware of, that's only going to allow the bad guys to come back in. So it's also very important to also scope out your intrusion and understand where all you're seeing these indicators. Okay, so hunting lateral movement, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but who's executing PSExec in my environment, right? And where is PSExec even executing from? This is just a simple example, but if you start baselining your environment and building out, the directories of where these utilities are typically being ran by IT admins or people within your company, you start to see some interesting, I think, behaviors, things that might stand out, like, p.exe executing out of a temp directory, and that turns out to be, PSExec. I mean, that smells like a bad guy to me, right? Bad guys are very lazy. They like to name their binaries like single character or double character binaries. But then when it's executing out of a temporary directory, that just makes it even that more suspicious, right? So it's very important, to look for these types of things. In the rule itself that I have up here in the top, I say, process is equal to, PSExec.exe or the product name, right? So the metadata within that particular binary is sysinternals PSExec. That's how you identify when, adversaries are attempting to masquerade or, rename files. But what's nice is some of that metadata doesn't change unless, of course, they recompile it. But some of that metadata doesn't change. So it can really help you identify when someone's done something kind of sneaky, right? Okay, this is my favorite one, hunting network connections. I mean, I have such a field day doing this. I mean, I could literally do this all week. When you start to look at, outbound network connections by binaries, and then even if you pair that, right, with the signature status, is it signed, is it unsigned? Sometimes that doesn't matter as much. You can really find some bad stuff, right, in the environment. I remember when I first started out, conducting threat hunting back in 2007, right? I didn't have all these cool, awesome tools. I didn't have, Twitter out there tweeting about the latest, threat hunting playbooks. We had to, figure out how to really go about doing this. We actually collected all the proxy logs for the environment. So every single outbound network connection that was made, we'd have sent to a centralized Linux server, right? Once I had it on that Linux server, I started creating these, grep awk commands to search through this, this log set, identifying anytime there was outbound network connections, maybe once a day, or maybe it was once a month, or twice a day, right? Looking for patterns of behavior. And this actually led to a couple of state-sponsored investigations, just doing that one thing, looking at that network logs. But I think the negative, right, the downside effect of that is once you identify that there is an outbound network connection, you got to then pair it back to the process, the endpoints that are doing it. That's why I absolutely love endpoint data, right? Because when you can see the offending process, like wscript.exe is making an outbound network connection call to this particular domain or this particular IP address, it actually makes your job a lot easier versus kind of just sitting at that network level. Not saying that you can't do it there, but it does make it a lot easier. So hunting for network connections can be I think very fruitful. In this particular case, I have an example where wscript is executing this text file out of the program data directory. It's actually a JavaScript that's doing that. So this is a no-no. I mean, you're never going to see this. This one actually stands out a lot more. But when you start looking at frequency analysis, how many times do we see these outbound network connection calls by particular processes? I think it's a very effective threat hunting method. Hunting for web shells. This is another favorite of mine. If you see, IIS servers like Tomcat or w3wp.exe or Apache executing a command shell, right, on a server, there's a pretty good chance that there's a web shell on that bad boy, right? What are web shells? It's a piece of code that it executes on like an IIS server, right, and allows them to interact with the underlying operating system. So executing commands on the operating system. In this particular example that you see below here, you can see that they're changing directories from inetpub, but they're also executing something there on the end. So can you pick up on the type of web shell that we're doing here? So this is a CD and echo. It's actually the China Chopper. Don't hate me, I didn't come up with the name, the China Chopper, but that is the name of this particular web shell. This is an indicator, right? Looking for these types of indicators, once again, can prove to be very, very useful when you're identifying, any sort of anomalous behavior, from your server environment. All right, let's go into some advanced threat hunting use cases. We've talked about some 101. What does it all mean? What is threat hunting? What sort of skills are required? Once you've built up, right, these skill sets of, looking through the data and identifying, suspicious anomalous behavior, once you become familiar with, the Windows operating system or the Linux or OS X, right, you kind of want to take it to the next level, right? Only so much you can do sometimes pivoting off of all these events and alerts. Now you want to be extremely proactive and really go out and start collecting some additional artifacts. We're going to talk a little bit about that right now. All right. Shim cache hunting. If you haven't done this, you need to, right? So the application compatibility cache, this stores literally a history of all the processes, right, that have executed on a particular machine. So forensically, you can go out into your enterprise and say, hey, has this particular program executed ever, right, across my environment on any particular date? And this method and this approach has proven extremely helpful to us during, multiple campaigns, right, in terms of identifying any sort of either existing, campaigns or things that have occurred maybe a couple of years ago, right, that are just as important. It's always good to understand, what sort of adversaries are targeting your environment, what sort of tools are executing, because you want to build up, profiles on the groups that target you. Understanding, your adversary is very, very important to this game, right? Because then you can catch them a lot faster, right? It's minimizing that initial infection to detection time as much as possible. This particular method is a very good approach to that. You can use a tool from Mandiant or FireEye, whatever. It's called the shim cache parser, right? You can download this. Once you've exported that particular registry key, I put the whole registry key down there below, you can have them all come to like a centralized box, have it parse, via the shim cache parser, and then start going to town. This is what the data looks like, right? It gives you like a plethora of information. It shows you all the programs that have executed, right? The date and time, right? This information is extremely useful. In this particular case, I can identify, for example, Mimikatz, Frunk just executed. If anyone knows what Mimikatz is, that's a credential dumping program. So I can say back in 2014, I had a credential dumping program problem, right, in my environment. And then in 2016, I had a very similar problem. They also executed from a very similar directory. Is this the same adversary? Is this, similar type behavior activity that's occurring? Yes, it was, right? This is a perfect example where, you can go back in time and actually search, right, to see if there's any sort of, like I said, adversary traces. And then if you really want to get super crazy like me, you can create this cool hunting dashboard in Splunk or any sort of SIM that you guys have, right? In Splunk, what you can do is actually ingest this data. You can build all these cool little panels. You can say, okay, I want to look across my shim cache output for single character binaries that have executed, or, double character binaries. I want to look for tools that have executed from a temporary directory, or I want to look for, suspicious binaries that it might have, named itself to look like SVC host, or maybe the name of the binary is like 421.exe, right? So now you can actually start to build a pivotable dashboard, using this data that you're collecting off of, your endpoints. I think getting to this state, once again, you start to get to that more advanced state, right? You're being proactive. You're looking for things that are occurring in your environment, whether it's historical or even current, right? You can identify some very interesting behavior. Auto runs hunting. We talked a little bit about that in my earlier example when you're looking at the auto runs key. But let's say that you don't have sysmon deployed, or you don't have any sort of endpoint detection, response type tool recording all this telemetry. Who cares, right? You can be proactive and still go out and look at what is actually executing out of the auto runs directory. So auto runs from, sysinternals tools is a fantastic tool. You can execute the program. That's the command right there. You can adjust the flags to whatever you like. But once you've outputted this data and have it all come to a centralized location, then you can start, parsing through that information. You can start analyzing it and looking for any sort of interesting type activity. You can also create this crazy Splunk dashboard, right? In this particular case, I can instantly look at all the different things that are occurring right in my auto runs. Show me anytime there's a file that's not found on disk. However, there's an auto run entry of that. Show me times auto runs is with a toolbar, or runs in the launch string, right? All these things or pieces of information, right, can be used to help kind of guide you, right, to some interesting behavior, right? You don't want to just bring all this data to one centralized repository and try to figure out, what do I do next? You want to be thoughtful about it, right? You want to know going into this, what do I want to seek out? What sort of, parts of, the auto run, file path do I want to look into to identify maybe something suspicious? Once you start building out, those different hypotheses or things that you want to seek, within your hunting campaign, right, it's going to make it that much easier, right? You're going to be a lot more effective at conducting these types of exercises, and you're going to be a lot more effective at finding things too, versus kind of just looking at all the data and drowning in that data, because it's a big no-no. All right. Yara hunting. This is quite possibly one of my most favorite tools, right? I mean, I don't know if you can get any better than this. Yara, you can create your own custom signatures. You can identify specific malware families. You can leverage a whole repository or data set of signatures that have, been identified right over all the different years from various threat hunters, and then seek out across your enterprise any sort of, files that might match or trigger on those, particular signatures. This is really, I think a very interesting approach, right, when it comes to threat hunting, because you can be very targeted with this approach. You can, focus on specific, type indicators, like maybe a specific malware family that you want to seek out, or, right, you can look for everything, bring everything back and see, is there any sort of, existing malware that exists across my environment, or any sort of tools, right? A lot of times, sometimes when adversaries come into an environment, they might drop a folder filled with tools, and maybe they only execute one. There's a problem, from a threat hunting perspective with that approach, because you're only seeing in the EDR telemetry, programs that have, possibly run. You might not see everything else. This is where you kind of start to pick up, right, all those additional indicators, files that are at rest, files that might have been dropped by, a particular adversary. And I do think this is, another critical component, right, to the whole threat hunting package. And here's just an example, right? Let's say your CISO is like, hey, bro, or gal, or non-gender neutral, however progressive your CISO is. If he's asking you these questions, do we have any sort of sunburst malware existing out right in my environment? You can answer that question. You can be like, no, we don't. I already checked it with my Yara scan. this is a perfect use case, right? Because FireEye, I believe, right? FireEye came out with a whole set of, different signatures looking for Sunburst and Teardrop malware and Supernova malware, right? You can take those signatures, you can package them up, use Yara to then scan your enterprise to see if any of that exists. In this particular case, most likely you would just scan the servers, right, that are running, the SolarWinds type software. But here's an example, right, where you can actually go out and be proactive and be able to answer, back your CISO that no, we're not at risk, or no, there has been no traces or artifacts associated with a compromise, in our particular environment. So getting to this level or this state where, you're being proactive and creating your own signature sets and scanning, I think is an awesome thing, right? Okay, do or do not. There is no try. So let's go into this. Download the free utilities that I discussed today, right? Become comfortable executing them, learning about them, get as much hands-on experience as you possibly can. If you're just starting out in this game, I mean, there's no better advice. You got to have hands-on experience to do well in this particular field, right? And some of the utilities that I talked today are, bar none, some of the best, at cost, right? Free. I also recommend using a virtual machine to conduct a lot of these tests. Let's not use our production, systems, please. Let's discover what programs might have historically ran, right, on a particular program. Conduct these tests yourselves just to see what the output looks like, right? What sort of programs might have registered themselves to an auto run location. I think it's important to also, train yourself and really start to build this capability before, you start going out into the enterprise and start pulling all this data. Become a master with that Sysmon agent, right? So once again, if you don't have an EDR tool, Sysmon is fantastic. It does all this stuff, and the visibility this tool provides is absolutely amazing, right? So become useful with Sysmon. It's just one of the best, right, in terms of collecting that telemetry. Also begin to develop these rules that we discussed. Align yourself with that MITRE ATT&CK framework. Go to that website and learn about all those different areas, that they discuss right on that site. Drill down into each of them. Understand, what's been discovered in the past. What sort of indicators and detections do I need to then build into, my profile set? So truly understanding the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I think, is very important as well. And expand your scope right over time and start deploying these tools right to your enterprise. I always say acquire permission first, though. None of this ask for forgiveness later. I tried that one time. Sometimes they don't forgive. Sometimes they're actually not very forgiving when you start messing with production systems. So make sure that you ask for permission before you start going down this route. Have a project in place. Make sure people have signed off on it. I'm not recommending during this talk to start running all these tools on all your machines without doing that first, of course. And then, centralize your logs, right? You want to centralize those logs to a centralized location, right? It allows for much quicker analysis, because this is what this is about, right? It's being able to kind of quickly and analyze and be efficient, with your processes in terms of conducting threat hunting. You don't want to spend all day every day taking forever trying to aggregate to a location and grepping across all that. That is old school, right? We got SIMs now, we got free SIMs, we got all this stuff available today to make our jobs, I think, a lot easier. And then begin the hunt, get out there and have a good time. All right, so A New Hope, what did we discuss about today? And really kind of wrapping this thing all up together. So threat hunting is a critical component to your overall cybersecurity program, right? In terms of getting sign on and buy-in from the execs and especially the CISO, that is absolutely important, right? Because you want it to be a part of your overall cybersecurity maturity program. You want to get the necessary funding or support, whether they're buying you tools or not. It doesn't matter. You want that support, though, to conduct these types of exercises, because being proactive and hunting for different type attack activity is a lot better than sitting back and waiting for some sort of incident to occur. Trust me. So make sure that it's a part of your overall program. Do not become discouraged either. If you're spending days or weeks without finding anything, it doesn't matter, right? This helps continue to develop your skills over time, right? You're not going to necessarily find something on day one or even possibly day 7, but the more you do, the more you do it, and the more you become familiar with the operating system, the more you become familiar with, normal parent-child relationships. Like, this parent executed this child. Is that, legitimate, right? All of these, tidbits of information that you develop, right, in your skill set, you'll start to spot these things a lot quicker, a lot faster, whenever you're doing these, types of investigations. Threat hunting does not require a massive budget, right? I've been kind of saying this throughout the whole thing. Without, you don't need the latest and greatest security technologies deployed. You can get this job done too if you don't have that. So, if you're strict on budget and you don't have any additional funds, you don't need budget, right? As long as you have some time and some buy-in from the top that you can conduct these types of activities, it's very, very critical. And learn from others, reading blog posts on the latest and greatest threat hunting techniques. There's actually, I think, a fantastic set of, threat hunting playbooks and things to look for. The guy's name at Cyber War Dog. I'm not going to take all the credit for teaching this guy many years ago, but of course he was my young Padawan. But he's got a fantastic set of information on threat hunting, and he's a good friend of mine, Roberto. So definitely check out that. That's only one example. There's like a million out there, right? There's a million, I think, people in this industry who are fantastic at this. You can just go out there and start searching for threat hunting in the tweet space. And then also, I know this is a little controversial, but consider working for an organization that'll truly help grow your skills, right? If you're responsible for protecting like 100 to 200 endpoints in a small business that'll never be targeted, I mean, I hate to say this, but you might not get anything out of that, sort of, opportunity, unfortunately, right? I'm used to, so when I started my career, I worked for a company that had 90,000 endpoints. I mean, can you imagine the amount of fun I had in that environment? 90,000 endpoints. There was something interesting that happened every single day. But when you have a limited scope, when it's only a handful of machines and, you're in a business line that's just never going to be hit, you're going to get bored. Trust me. I'm not saying leave your job or quit your job, but just consider that, right, as you're, getting into your career, next steps, like where do you want to go with your career? I think it's important, right, to work for, an environment where you're going to start seeing stuff, right? And hey, if you want to get in touch with me, you have any questions, there's my deets, right? tbandos@digitalguardian.com. You can email me. You can also at me at Twitter. I am at CyberTimmer. So please feel free to do that. Also, during the session, I am going to be handling any sort of questions that you guys have. So, as I've gone through this, if there's anything that comes up and you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder, please type that away. I'm going to be readily available during a session time slot. So please sure to enter those questions and I'll answer them as well. So one piece of advice, may the hunting forces be with you, okay? That was a very horrible impression. I don't want to leave with that, but I want to say good luck. Thank you for attending my presentation, and I hope to hear from you.